that I think would be beneficial for us here. And the prediction markets was definitely one of those. So again, I see that as an emerging threat to horse racing. And as it's played out in a very rapid fashion, it is really literally up and down day to day on how these things are playing out. And if you're not super familiar with them, we're going to give you a little bit of an overview with the panel, but also really take a deep dive. Some of you may have been at the Racing Symposium in December, where Michelle Fisher, who will moderate this panel, also moderated the panel there. And I can promise you that the changes just from December to now are pretty remarkable. So with that said, thanks to the sponsors for the Minnesota and Alabama HBPA for helping me get this panel put together. And as the speakers are making their way to the stage, I will introduce first the moderator, Michelle Fisher. She's the Vice President of SIS Content Services, and also SIS has been a corporate sponsor for the National HBPA, supporting the Horseman's Journal for several years now, and so really appreciate her and everything she does for the industry. Next up, Pete Holt Gardner. He's the founder and marketing general partner of C4 Partners. Holt's he was introduced to me, I should say, via the Steve Vick show. Pete is an owner in the industry, owns racehorses, and has the key ability to be in this particular space professionally. So he and I now have, Deborah always looks and says, "Who are you texting?" I was like, "Oh." So he's really educated me on prediction markets and where they are, and most importantly, enlightened me to how many lawsuits are going on with this particular prediction issue right now. Next up, we have Jason Johnston, sportsbook manager at Warhorse Gaming. Lynn McNally is here, again, working with the Nebraska HBPA on their racetracks. And then Dave Basler, I think everyone knows Dave. Dave is the committee chair for our Wagering and Gaming Initiatives Committee, something that this prediction market wagering kind of fits in. So Dave's here, obviously, more importantly, as the Horseman's representative point of view, as we go through this navigation of what we do as horsemen with this particular issue. And then last but not least, I'm very honored that Mr. Dennis Drazen is here on Zoom. He certainly wanted to be here live, but he teaches a law class and it coincided. But I would like to think he feels as if this issue is as important as I do to make sure we understand and be ready for a fight. Probably, at least most of you are on my email blast list, and I sent out his article that was in the TDN, and it was, I texted him that very day and asked him about this panel, and he definitely agreed to be on once we got the date set. But again, on Zoom, he's the one that really has educated me from the standpoint of when you look at the state fights that prediction markets is going through, horse racing does have the Interstate Horse Racing Act. And as you'll learn in a little bit, the prediction market folks, whether it be Kalshi, Polymarket, they kind of veiled themselves in a federal cover and said that, the states, they don't really matter in what Kalshi or Polymarket wants to do. So when you look at, and go back to the Interstate Horse Racing Act, that is a federal cover for us. So we believe, or at least I believe, I'm not an attorney, but at least I believe there is a veil that we have some protection in the Interstate Horse Racing Act. And as one of my texts with Holt, first time it was actually brought up in this banter back and forth on all these experts that are talking about this particular issue, the Interstate Horse Racing Act actually came up. So with that, again, thanks to the panelists for being here. Dennis, thank you, sir, for getting on Zoom with us, and I will turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you, Eric, for that introduction. We're just missing the lights and the music because we came on stage. Then, yes. I'm not sure you can hear us. Oh,
thank you. Hello?
Virtually, video,
okay, well, you're sorting out Dennis's audio. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Before we start the discussion, I thought it may be a good exercise for us to just start the very beginning and
Hello?
look at what we are talking about. What are prediction markets? Prediction markets are that
I can hear you.
or the that will come up later. It's very important. They're offered under licenses by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and the National Futures Association. To individuals who buy and sell contracts on the African elections, economics, sports, and it acts as a tool for activating collective wisdom. It creates real-time probability forecasts. These markets are usually, not always, have two, offered in the binary sense, yes, no question. Here are a few of the prominent companies that are involved in prediction markets, but there are many. But we'll probably heard from Calci. Everyone here, say hands. You know what Calci is, okay. So the latest valuation of Calci is $11 billion. They're trading at about $1 billion a week in contracts. How much is it now?
January they did over 10 million.
Okay. I also may see that there's some really interesting partnership deals. There are the official prediction markets, CNN, amongst many other media outlets. So this is really becoming mainstream. The second one we may hear a lot about is poly markets. Maybe some of what they're doing lately.
So the whole market has a very robust infrastructure offering many of these markets internationally. They're a crypto-based exchange. They were thrown out of the U.S. market in 2022, just came back in 2025, but they are only offering sports in the U.S. They're not offering the other contracts. Obviously, they have design on enhancing their portfolio, but right now they're only offering sports in states without regulated gaming.
But they are
Very
very cool. We also see a few on the list that you may know, Robin, crypto.com. But interestingly enough, the sports books didn't want to be left out of this. We've seen some sports books pop up with prediction markets, FanDuel predicts, Fanatic markets, DraftKings predictions. And they are generally operated in states that do not have regulated sports wagering at this point. You can't see this, it's so small, but we did some screenshots from County just to give you a flavor of what's out there. So first one is a pro basketball choice elections. Who's going to be the nominated president for Democratic and the Republican Party? Who's going to win the best picture for the Oscars? What's the Fed decision going to be in March? What are gas prices going to be this month? That's the market. Another market that's up on Calci is one that just happened. What will Trump say during his State of the Union address? There were markets on how long that would be, how much will our city get this month, where will the S&P close at the end of 2026? Will Bitcoin be above the 200K next year? So those are some of the contracts that you can find on these prediction markets. So today, with my panel, we're gonna discuss these areas. We're gonna talk about the CFTC oversight of these contracts. We're gonna talk about the lawsuits that have been filed. I haven't heard.
He's gonna call him.
That has just changed within the last 24 hours.
He's gonna turn
the states, tribes are putting in lawsuits about the validity of these platforms. Cow cheese on the offensive, the CFTC is now offended. We're gonna talk a little bit about responsible gaming, the liquidity compared to other forms of betting on these platforms. What sports league's attitude and acceptance to it, the effect on sports wagering, and of course, what you're all here for is horse racing. Okay, let's take it right over people. Prediction markets, they have been around for a long time, and many of us are familiar with future markets on agricultural crops such as meat and corn and energy products such as oil and gas. So what has prompted the CFTC to allow a wide range of contracts?
So, what I don't know is the prediction markets have been around, as you mentioned, for an awful long time. In fact, since the 19th century, event betting has been taking place on Wall Street. So, in 1980s, the modern concept,
Yeah, whatever it was.
making traction with primarily academic experiments. The first big one was Iowa electronic market in 1988. Which used real money for election predictions in order to study academically again the wisdom of the crowd. That bloomed into a number of different semi-academic experiments that started to realize that there was a lot of money to be made. One of the earliest commercial experimentation, which I was very familiar with, was in Hollywood. Was a company called Hollywood Stock Exchange that launched in 1996. Now, that was the virtual market for trading quote unquote stocks and trading stocks, securities, and equities and also celebrities. That became a very, very robust platform. They require money back there for the shareholder. That was actually shut down on a real money basis years later because Hollywood was so concerned about it that they asserted into Hart Scott an absolute elimination of being able to monetize synthetically their media product. The funny thing is now they're regretting that because they realize how much money is being made. In fact,
Tomorrow we're gonna have one that's just a straight, there's not gonna be a panel, it's just gonna be one dude.
So that they can go create their own versions of this and monetize.
Because if they're not having to hear the.
So the CFTC, historically regulates.
So we'll, I think that's the first one tomorrow.
It's treating them as derivatives rather than vehicle.
So if we can get that guy is.
Historically, the CFTC was really cautious and limited the scope because they wanted to avoid public interest conflict. But this company, Calvin, has been very aggressive, raised a ton of money, and I realized that there was a loophole. Similar to the loophole that fantasy sports companies exploited in the early 2010s. And they were able to win a decision in the 2024 court ruling in favor of Calvin to allow regulated election betting. Subsequent to that, during the 2024 election, folks realized that these markets were really good at defining a signal. And a number of the election results, which were called 2024, which the big pollsters have got really wrong, these markets were absolutely right. I've always said that they're, the huge benefit of prediction markets, and I'm kind of an advocate of them regulated and honorable way, that is that signal becomes very clear. When people put money behind their opinions, you're able to define that signal much better than you are in the general kind of polling where people lie, people don't want to tell you the answer they really believe, a number of other reasons why you can't get that level of crime signal. But once that ruling was made, it really opened Pandora's box. So after the 2024 elections, these companies just exploded, and then they realized that they might be able to offer a number of other products that would massively increase their monetization. And that was sports bet for prediction. Depending on how you want to call it, the reality is contracts that the primary choices on sports, much like you can see on a regulated sports book. Where Nick's going to win this game, how much, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they saw monetary results that were rolling in for that. The exploitation of those markets and further growth. To the point that we are now, where they're offering much broader and wider breadth of product offering than the traditional sports companies. And as I said, Alfie alone in January did over $10 million in hand.
Dennis? Excuse me.
He could be limited.
And politics play a lot into this whole. Let's talk a little bit about what this administration, this may not have been possible in other administrations on.
Politics clearly plans this at a very, very high level, regardless of what your political take is. The sides that are running out, the CFTC is backed by the Trump administration very thoroughly.
Can you hear me now?
Jr. Is a large equity holder in one of these companies, and as an advisor to the competitor. So we really have a situation in which you have this administration and the federal government advocating very, very hard for these platforms, while the state governments where there are already regulated gaming commissions, the tribal nations, and generally democratic administrations and states, plus Utah, fighting that at a very high level.
All right, Dennis? We're just keeping it all on. Let's move on to, as prediction markets expand across the US, there have been numerous lawsuits, we discussed those by the states, tribes, operators such as Couchy, they're pushing back. What is the risk here? Is this gonna, as federal government, what's the risk here? Is this gonna end up in the Supreme Court? And what's the timeline? And then let's throw in one more factor, it's Congress. Since, especially with the conflict in Iran, we saw a number of prediction markets taking contracts on when the conflict would happen, when the bomb would happen. Well, the market did about $529 million on that particular subject. Couchy and their contracts on it. So Congress is now saying this is insider trading. Should we look into this? But nothing seems to be happening very quickly in Congress at the moment. So let's look right at work with this Congress.
So I think there's now 13 states, services, my home state of Nevada is really leading the way, the result of having probably the best and most established gaming commission that understands how to fight these battles legally. And in fact, they were able to eliminate the fantasy sports companies who've never ever been able to operate since 2013 or so, and they're trying to do the same thing here. It's hard to keep up with it. In the last 24 hours, 3 lawsuits have been filed in Michigan. You have Tennessee, Massachusetts, Maryland, Connecticut, Arizona, and New Jersey. There are 20 federal lawsuits, and there are a number of conflicting court decisions. So it's really hard to figure out right now what's going to happen, where it's legal. But my belief is that the prediction markets are operating, a delay on the state strategy, because while these lawsuits are going on, they're still continuing to operate. Even Nevada hasn't been able to get a TRO on them. The goal being geofencing and blocking the ability for users in those states that were restricted to operate. But that hasn't happened yet, although it may happen imminently. Ultimately, it's going to have to be decided by the Supreme Court as to who has the ability to regulate these things, or if there's going to be a bifurcation and you're going to have 2 different worlds, one in which the CFTC and the federal government are regulating prediction markets, and then on the other side, you're going to have state governments regulating traditional sports gaming.
You're standing out here, Dennis. Dennis, let's hear your take on what's going to happen. Go ahead.
Yes, hello.
We hear you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we do hear you, Dennis.
So the futures market is nothing new. I've probably been experiencing the futures market for 50 years on other commodities, but certainly with the presidential election, followed by influencer questions, followed by getting into sports betting, it's really exploded. This market is huge. And I think they started mid-summer. One of the companies coming to talk to me about the possibility of horse racing. And the first slide they put up was the 2026 Haskell will the favorite win, yes or no?
We're not the way you're
At which time we discussed the Interstate Horse Racing Act. And I told them that we would be in court, litigating the case if they try and take a signal from Mama. You know, I saw the comments from Churchill about this year's Kentucky Derby. I certainly agree with their position. I think we have a very strong case, because we have federal laws that control this. It's not something that's trying to preempt state law. And I think as things go on, this week's been a very important week, certainly in Nevada. There were two very important decisions by the federal court saying that basically the prediction market does not totally preempt state law. And they dismissed those cases, sent them back to the state court. So I think certainly there's a lot to be said and a lot to be litigated. This case will eventually, in my opinion, end up in the United States Supreme Court. But right now, there's a lot of controversy. Those of you that saw the prediction market results on the war and Canadian debt and refusals to pay off on debts, it's becoming quite controversial. And there are litigated cases in a number of states. New Jersey argued the case before the Third Circuit. In October, we're waiting for a decision. The Ninth Circuit, has ruled. And, I heard the description of the cases that are out there. There are so many states with this being litigated. And I think that there are varying results in the states. And ultimately, this case will end up in the Supreme Court, but not for 3 to 5 years. And I think at this point, things are going to get hot with the Kentucky Derby. Last year, Pollard Market took $1.2 million on the Derby. I understand there were bets made on the Breeders' Cup this year. Those bets before Pollard Market were out of this country, but now I think the Derby's coming up. You're going to see these companies offering bets, prediction market bets, and I call them bets, not contracts, on the Derby, and we need to be prepared to decide how we're going to deal with this. My recommendation is that those of us that want to participate, we head to the federal court and assert our rights under the Interstate Horse Racing Act. But the industry is going to have to make some decisions, which we'll talk about later on. How do we react to what's going on? Whether this is something that's totally bad for the horse racing industry, or whether there comes a point in time when they reach out and they agree to pass their host fees and we embrace it. But that's a larger decision for the industry. That's not my decision alone. My decision alone for Monmouth Park would be to litigate this case in the event they try and take any horse racing wagers.
Hey, thank you, Dennis. We'll come back to more on horse racing, but let's look at the topic from a broader scope for now. One of the complaints, and we've alluded to it several times in our conversation already, is the thing about prediction markets is the lack of oversight. My question to you, Holt, is going to be, is the CFTC set up to oversee billions of dollars in contracts ranging from sports to pop culture to politics? We've just talked about the timing of the Iran attack and Pollard Market paying out, Calci canceling. That's just one extreme example.
Well, I can give a pretty short answer to this one, which is no. My background was in investment banking, and if you just take the prediction markets out of it, I don't think the CFTC is equipped properly to regulate the traditional markets like the CME, commodities markets, etc. They have got rid of a ton of their investigators and attorneys. So in fact, I believe they only have one principal attorney on their regulatory side, and that covers the, as I said, the entire swath of their traditional mandate, and now it's prediction market stuff. When Eric and I were first talking a few months ago, and he was saying, well, how do you see this all playing out? I said, my fear for these, if I was in the shoes of the prediction markets, which I am in some terms of some of my businesses, they will figure out how to screw themselves by two things. Their hubris at the management level, and through an oh my god event. And this oh my god event actually, I believe, happened over this weekend with this Alley Canadian market. So they were taking a huge amount of contracts on whether or not Alley Canadian would be out by a certain time frame, and that was February time frame for some of the traders. Obviously, he's now dead. He's clearly out of office. But a lot of these traders had not read, and it was not prominently displayed originally, and then they changed that very late in the game, was that a market that resolved in death would not be paid. So Kalshi made the decision to revoke the market and pay traders back with their price that they paid pre his death. But you can imagine if you had a 10x contract, which you put maybe $1,000 on, you had expected, actually one of my dear friends, that he was going to get more than $10,000 for that, and was celebrating as he found the news, and then found out that that was not the case. There was an extreme explosion of negative sentiment on social media, to the point that it's pretty entertaining to read the comments after Kalshi's CEO posted his missive as to why they were doing that. He had a very rough day, let's just put it that way. And rightly so. They made a decision that if I had been CEO, I would pay, and they just raised $12 billion, and like I said, they're doing over $10 billion in January. From a public perspective, I would have made the decision to eat that cost and not have the incredible negativity associated with the market that now has happened, especially in light of all these lawsuits that are going on and their need to remain at the forefront of a positive public opinion.
And power markets are being this.
And Polymarket Offshore actually made a decision to do exactly that. And funnily enough, they've had two major instances now of conflict where these two major prediction markets had a very different resolution on two conflicted markets.
That really comes back down to regulatory. When you look at horse racing, our regulatory bodies and your sports betting and what you go through to get on a license, the questions that are asked. This is almost like self-regulation is what we're seeing at the moment, is that.
Absolutely. And I'd say one other thing is that if anyone has any interest in looking at these markets, I use some bad word here, but definitions for a bitch. And the definitions of these markets are sometimes very different than what you would imagine them to be when you read the headline. Certain things are excluded that you wouldn't imagine being excluded, certain things are included that you wouldn't think. And I can assure you that the big players who are providing liquidity on the counter side of your contract play are very, very clear on what the definitions are.
Brings us into the whole concept of insider trading as well on what these markets are. We could spend a day on it, but I'm going to move on down to a new speaker. Jason, can bring you in here. Sports betting takes responsible gaming support very, very seriously. Do these programs expand to prediction market activity? And what are some of your concerns from the sports betting regulatory responsible gaming side?
So one of the things that Holt had brought up earlier on sites like Kalshi is they have what's called a sports enthusiast mode. So all of your trading essentially turns into a sports book. So they want to say that they're not a sports betting site, they're a trading site, but when you go into that mode and you put it side by side by your sports book, you can't tell them. In 2023, Lynn McNally, she's here with me. We are kind of the founding father and mother of sports wagering in the state of Nebraska. So much went into it. A lot of regulatory control went into how we build out the sports wagering catalog, all of our internal controls, all of the rules. It was a really tough challenge because the state of Nebraska, sports betting was brand new to them. It's not like we were going into Nevada trying to launch something there, but obviously it's well defined. There was a lot of inexperience within the state. So using Lynn's resources and my knowledge, we were able to put together a very robust sports wagering catalog over the last couple of years. One of the things, or a couple of things that are unique to Nebraska is that you cannot bet on Nebraska when they play within the state. So any collegiate team that plays within the state of Nebraska, you cannot wager on. Additionally, you cannot wager on any Nebraska player prop. So Dylan Raiola was kind of a dark horse to our fans, who's a quarterback in Nebraska, who transferred out. We could not put up wagering markets for that. In addition, you could not bet on any collegiate team trade in Nebraska live. So they were being like, wherever they played, you get on the road, you couldn't trade them live. So there were some particular things that were unique for our market. Kalshi and Polymark come right in and completely upended all of that. So all of the stuff that we tell our customers no, they come right in and immediately offer betting on Nebraska at home, betting, collegiate teams live, all the Nebraska players, in certain circumstances, you could trade them live. So it's kind of a huge slap from a regulatory standpoint of just, we're going to come in, we're going to do what we want. And if you've ever heard any of the press conferences from some of the CEOs of Polymarket and Kalshi, they're pretty aggressive guys. They want to take everybody down. They don't care about us. And while I think competition is something that makes all of us better, I think that there has to be a legal framework where that continues to evolve them. In 2025, Lynn was big in trying to get mobile wagering on the ballot for 2025. Elliot Bostar put forth some legislation to try to get mobile on the ballot. And there was a lot of internal discussion about how it affects young people. For those that are aware, Tom Osborne is about as anti-gambling sports wagering as you could possibly be, the legendary Huskers coach. So unfortunately, we were unable to get sports wagering on a mobile device on the ballot in 2025. They really didn't want to, they were really hung on protecting student athletes, protecting those underage, which of course, sports wagering, you go to a casino, you have to be 21. Well, fast forward just a couple months later, when Kalshi started to really blow up in the summer, really after March Madness in 2025, they really put themselves on the map. But fast forward, what happens? You've got, I told Lynn, I told some others now, their worst fears have come true. A senior in high school between periods can sign up for Kalshi and Polymarket in less than 45 seconds and get a bet down on Nebraska, bet on that home. So all the different things that we've done to protect the integrity as outlined by Title 296 in the state was just completely ran through by the prediction markets. For those that are in the casinos, we've got extremely internal controls, responsible gaming, such as every piece of collateral we have has to have responsible gaming number, some advice, resources. I signed up, with Kalshi myself because I want to know my enemy. There's never been one time that I've seen responsible gaming, any type of message on there, as well as self-exclusions, or a big thing at casinos. Don't see any self-exclusion that someone can't go. We've had self-exclusions for sports betting, but yet they can go straight to Kalshi and continue to wager like nothing happens. So there's no scrubbing of the state's database for self-exclusions. It's very much like they're gonna run what they want to run with, and wherever the rest falls and falls.
Can I jump in and say one thing on that? There's actually a really good reason for that, because if they admitted to the need for responsible gaming, it would be considered a gaming company. And there's never been anyone on the stock markets that I know of or in CME where there's a responsible trading policy. So they would be shooting themselves in the foot by doing that.
One of the things that we were talking about previously for those that have seen it, but Kalshi kind of made a boo-boo earlier, probably about 6 months ago, when they said sports betting is approved in all 50 states. I'm not sure if you've seen that.
Yep.
They retracted that real quickly and said that we work with a lot of different marketers and we can't protect our message entirely. So I find that part fascinating.
Just a reminder that words do matter, and the will matter as we move forward in this decision. So let's talk a little bit about why prediction markets are advantageous or attractive to investors or bettors, due to the liquidity standpoint compared to other forms of gaming.
Sure. So it's, I partner with a bunch of horses, and I'm a huge fan of horse racing business. I also worked and consulted for pretty much every major casino company, the sports gaming company out there. I sell information, spent on a daily basis. I also represent companies that are highly involved in providing data and prediction to the prediction markets. So I look at all of these things as tools, and I do see the benefit of prediction markets if used properly, especially to folks who are engaged in sports gaming, and there are a huge class of those, including a lot of my friends who are really good at it. Those folks who are really good at sports gambling traditionally have been eliminated from markets because the existing regulated sports books basically capitate anyone who wins. Their model, largely with a few exceptions, is to get retail play that loses and to monetize that at the best possible rate, regardless of the consequences. In fact, if you listen to DraftKings CEO Jason Rollins, he has said that explicitly in his in many of his message to the market. The beauty of prediction markets from most folks' perspective is there is no way to limit it. It is a true pure market. It is marketed as one in which there are average folks trading against each other, but that's really not the case. So if you went and made any of these predictions on one of these markets, generally your counterparty is going to be a hedge fund. These are the people that I work with. They're some of the sharpest people in the world, and their goal is to provide liquidity to these markets. And for that, they get a discount and preferred terms to trade. Now, in fact, these markets themselves offer both, they have internal trading shops under their umbrella. Kalshi has one, Coinmarket has one, who are tied with some of the biggest financial operators in the world, providing that liquidity. And then there are third-party deals with preferred terms who are doing the same. So the reality, much like what happened in the fantasy markets when they exploded, was that the average guy is being outsharped and out-predicted by people who are literally quantitative geniuses with hedge fund type architecture behind them, and are printing, ROI like you cannot believe.
Really taking this kind of horse racing is needs to really look at the pari-mutuel market where we see a number of high volume players still in there. Like the Globe and Hate, they're in the pari-mutuel market because they can't get their bet on the sports book. And I have sat in front of you many times talking about why horse racing should also be in the fixed odds market for the everyday player. We see a big correlation here. The prediction markets and pari-mutuel is that anyone, especially the sharks, can get into those pools, and that's where they have to go if they want to bet.
That's absolutely right.
We also see, I've read that there are a number of sports books and they also actually in the prediction markets as well.
Well, this is the new trend. Yes, pretty much all of the big sports books are now using prediction markets as a risk mitigation wholesale layout. So it is actually a great tool for them. So everything that they're advocating against, they're in the background using on a daily basis.
The web can see the more intricate. So let's turn our attention to a moment to other sports. That's just like early sports betting, we're seeing a shift in sports leagues' acceptance of prediction markets. Now, early on with sports betting, and I'm looking at you, Dennis, you can't see me looking at you, but I'm looking at you. Early days of PASPA, we had the NFL, a number of them saying, oh, this is terrible, we're not going to support it, and now everyone supports it. We've seen on the prediction market switches, we've seen the NHL, the MLS were the first to be multi-year partnerships with Kalshi and Power Market. Now while the NBA Commissioner Adam Silver, he's indicated that there's a focus on integrity risks in these platforms. But the league is just going to treat them similarly to traditional sports betting. Are these indications the prediction markets are here to stay? We're seeing sports leagues accepting them. Dennis?
I think that the prediction markets are here to stay for a lot of reasons. And the leagues were totally against during the litigation. Any sports betting, they said it would destroy, sports integrity. But quickly they turned around and they went all in. And when PASPA was overturned, all the sports teams were worth double and triple the numbers that they're getting for sports teams these days on valuations are significant. But I think, we'll have to look at, and this is not a political statement, but Donald Trump, our president, has appointed the chair of the CFTC. They're all in on keeping this prediction market open. Donald Trump Jr. is an advisor to Kalshi, a participant, a equity holder in Polymarket. And at the end of the day, I don't think this is going away. And I think that we're going to have to embrace it and deal with it. I firmly believe that the Interstate Horse Racing Act gives us protections that the other sports venues don't have and the prediction markets don't have. The Interstate Horse Racing Act is federal law, so you can't say that it's preempted by the CFTC rules and regulations and the adaptability of the prediction markets. What I do think is going to happen is that it's already happening. They will approach us at some point as an industry and talk to us about paying host fees and entering into a version of the Interstate Horse Racing Act with all the consents. And the question is, do we want that? No, I stand today where Churchill stands, that as an industry, we should oppose the prediction markets taking wagers on horse racing. But I query, if the prediction markets, the Kalshis, Polymarkets, and others of the world come to the industry as a whole and say, we'll pay the host fees that you're currently getting, do we embrace it or do we reject it? So I think that's a question for the industry, but my experience with the industry has been nobody's on the same page. And I don't think we're all going to get together as a whole and embrace accepting wagers, on the prediction markets, because it somehow takes away from the other revenues that we're making. So I think Churchill took the position that they're happy with their distribution at this time. I think that the prediction market is a real threat to the horse racing industry unless we handle it correctly. Today, as I sit here, I'm opposed to the prediction markets taking in wagers on horse racing. But I think it goes way beyond that. There are integrity concerns. I don't think there's professional responsibility. I think that the ages of bets that you can take, most states have 21. You can bet at 18. People with fake IDs and parents who enable them, or even betting at a younger age. I think the prediction markets are here to stay, and we have to figure out, as an industry as a whole, what we want to do about it. Today, as I said, I'm opposed to prediction markets on horse racing, and it's even affecting our revenues on sports betting. The more they invade the sports betting market, our share of the revenues that are being collected now on sports betting are being affected. So this is something we have to grapple with, and I'm glad that Eric was willing to put this on your agenda today so we can embrace it as an industry and think about how to deal with it.
To Dennis's point, one of the big numbers that we track in Vegas every year is the handle on the Super Bowl. 2 weeks before the Super Bowl, Kalshi took the single largest electronic trading board on Las Vegas Boulevard to advertise its sports betting prediction markets for the Super Bowl. And for the first time in, I believe, 15 years, regulated sportsbook handle for the Super Bowl was substantially down. And that is largely attributable to that liquidity going to the prediction markets.
That's exactly what my next question is. I'm going to throw this over to Jason to talk a little bit about how state regulated sports betting is feeling the effect from prediction markets. Not just give us a very good feel more than Super Bowl. How are you feeling on your state?
Well, with Nebraska being relatively new, we've been on an upward trajectory since we launched. One of the things that's important with how the prediction markets are affecting in Nebraska sports wagering in general is Nebraska HBPA gets a cut of every sports wager that we make. We've been fortunate to grow revenue and handle every month since we launched in 2023. That is until we got really into Q4 of last year, we started to see NFL start to trend down a little bit. As Holt mentioned, and Dennis, just really the lack of engagement in the Super Bowl. Now, I do think the matchup fared a little bit worse than what it's been previous years, but we can definitely see it. I see guys in the sports book using Kalshi as comparing odds and whatnot. One of the things that we're going to have to do as a property is really lean into the things that sports books do well, and that's really selling the environment, the experience in the book. A lot of people don't want to watch sports at home. They want to watch it in environment with their friends, their families, other passionate fans. And while Kalshi and Polymarket have made some good strides, they're still not there as far as some of the different wagering options. I do believe the sports books still continue to have a better and more robust cross-sport parlay functionality and same game parlay. And I think the live wagering is exponentially better with sports wagering. Is get a lot of micro markets, a lot of niche sports, and just the ability to tie more together makes it more beneficial for the recreational player to participate in sports wagering. However, I do recognize that those that are sharp bettors, professional bettors, they would absolutely be better served to go to the prediction markets as the liquidity is there, the price is there, and more wagering like that. I think there's some opportunity there, but it's really just selling the property amenities, selling the experience, the rewards program. You know, Kalshi doesn't have a rewards program. We do. We reward our players with experiences based on how many bets they make and tier credits and all that, which is standard operating procedure for casinos. So, you know, prediction markets can't replicate that atmosphere and hospitality. But I am concerned as we do contribute a large amount to Nebraska HBPA. You know, we've been feeling a little bit of the hit in the last 6 months, and just try to claw some of that back, or at least have Kalshi regulated in the same sense of the things that we can't offer, like I mentioned earlier about Nebraska athletics. Why can't we have them abide by the same rules?
Now we're going to get to the part where we've been alluding to where does horse racing fit? Given the various content, both sports and everything else the prediction markets are offering, it's natural to assume that horse racing, at least the big days, will be attractive to prediction market platforms. We talked, as mentioned, in the Interstate Horse Racing Act protects the sport. Many party say it takes a bet. Prediction markets identify their products as contracts or swaps. These are words, and we can all say it's betting, but this point is contracts or swaps. So I think we've already answered the question if we expect to see horse racing make an appearance on prediction market platforms. So yes or no? Is money on that?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Okay, Jason?
Without a doubt, you can see what they've done just by mimicking sports wagering, and the sports enthusiasts who sell it all. I think they're going to turn the final pathway forward. And I know Dennis spoke through it. I do see them dipping their toe into maybe the Triple Crown eventually. Will the favorite win the race? Something like that is where I think they're going to try to begin.
And this is where it gets complicated. What should tracks and horsemen be considered here? And I'm going to start because, it's easy to say, no, we're not going to allow it. No. We can talk about the ways forward, but this isn't just about what horse racing should do. It's just what's happening across all of betting. We're seeing the sports wagering, we talk about lotteries, casinos, prediction markets. There's just so many options today to an individual that want to make a bet on whatever they want to make a bet on. And horse racing to me is a small part of that. It's a big part to us because that's the industry we're in. But, do we embrace this somehow? We find a way to get out there, to get our sport out there, is it a legal action? And there's 60 other cases ahead of us there. We talk about, you talked about Dennis, that's the Interstate Horse Racing Act being federal, and trying to consider their federal payments as well. So this is the question to each of you. What should tracks and horsemen consider here? Not what they should do, but what should you consider at this point? I'll start with you, Dave, because you've been so quiet.
I agree with Dennis. Ultimately, what we have to consider is litigation, because I think Kalshi Poly Market made it very clear that they don't believe that they need approvals, and I'm sure the Interstate Horse Racing Act is something that they don't believe they need an approval on. So once they ultimately start taking bets, I think the industry players have to decide if they're willing to be 61st in court, because if they're not willing to do that, I think they're gonna take bets and we're not gonna have to pay. So
Then what if they do say, I'll pay you, but we're not gonna pay you as much as what you make over here in our mutual wagering?
that's absolutely a conversation that I think will happen. It happened, quite frankly, with Exchange Week. And ultimately, exchange wagering took place in New Jersey with Dennis, but nowhere else in the country. And I don't think that was good for our players, but we couldn't come to an agreement as an industry with the players in that spot on what the right number was. And I can't tell you today what the right number is on this. They're going to say the volume's huge. You don't need much of that at all. And we're going to say, interstate horse racing in Texas, we need more of that, and then you're going to go back and forth on it. But I think you're going to need a court to say that before they come to you. But Dennis may have a different.
Well, it's interesting, we are shrinking industry. We did not embrace fixed odds. I think exchange wagering was before its time in New Jersey. As an industry, we did not accept fixed odds fully, it's out there. Now we're saying maybe, where we want more money, prediction markets, and our parimutuel pools continue to climb every year. So these are some of the things that we need to consider. It is a threat. Jason, let me let you come in here.
The one thing that I'll say is that if there's not a hard block, they're gonna swing for the fences. And it's gonna escalate fast. Just look at how much Kalshi has changed over the last 9 months from a consumer experience. The other backup plan would be get ahead of it, try to find a partnership with it and get a piece of the pie, because I think Kalshi and Pine Market are just gonna try to run through everybody and just get what they can get, just like they've done in other sports wagering states, and deal with the lawsuits later.
Remember, it's not just Kalshi and Pine Market, but there's a number of others about Hollywood and crypto.com.
I follow that. I follow this every day, and I have advised a number of folks who are terrified of this new spaces that you're probably best to try to get ahead of it. Find a partner who you can add the unique industry knowledge of your sector and build a product that absolutely delivers the greatest user experience for the customer. Also potentially offers markets and options that may actually not be available to horse owners right now, but may be helpful. I use the example of an owner who may want to mitigate risk on a horse going into your stuff or something like that. There are ways to design markets that become helpful to the industry in question and expand the breadth of markets offered, things like jockey of the year. And the one thing that we all worry about horse racing is that the next generation, the younger generation, is not as engaged as previous generations. And one thing you will see with these markets, especially, is that there is concern about the younger users, but they are fully engaged and they understand the graphical user interface and the mobile apps so well that they've created products that are infinitely better to use, frankly, than what's available in the traditional horse recreation business.
Dennis, so prediction market platform comes to you and offers you a deal. You know what you're gonna do. If they don't offer you a deal, you're gonna go to court. They offer you a deal. What are your thoughts? What are you gonna consider here?
So I consider the whole prediction market issue. I mean, for me, it's pretty easy. If they try and take a bet on Monmouth Park, Haskell, or any other races at Monmouth Park, I'm a lawyer and litigate for a living, and I'll be in court as quickly as I can draft a complaint. But when I look at the larger picture, do I bring that myself, or do I try and do an industry effort where we do a class action against these companies? And then when I think about this more, which I've been doing since the summer when they first approached me, there are areas that are not covered by the Interstate Horse Racing Act. And while we certainly have rights under the Interstate Horse Racing Act, you could grow a market. I probably don't want to give them ideas, but for example, can you take a prediction market on the handle over under a certain number, yes or no, on the Kentucky Derby? On every day in racing, can you do prediction markets on handle? Can you get involved in the breeding market? Can you predict, the futures of offspring with different stallions? Can you grow the industry by this? And I think right now, I'm not opposed to all this, but when we did sports betting, one of the goals was that our industry had a limited amount of revenue that we were making from horse racing alone. But the minute you put horse racing on all the sports books, it opens up the odds to 20 times the amount of people and increases the revenues as a whole for the industry. So at some point, if the industry wants to embrace it and sit down and we can get paid the same as we're currently getting for our host fees, do we succumb to letting the prediction market in, even though we understand that the integrity and some of the other factors that we think are important are not being addressed? There are no taxes that are being paid. I think that as a whole, this is an important step for the industry. As I said before, I'm strictly opposed to it today, and will join anyone that wants to fight them. But if the industry as a whole wants to embrace it and try and cut a deal to try and grow our revenues, I'm open to a conversation. Doesn't mean I would do it. Right now, I think prediction markets would be bad for horse racing.
And Dennis, one thing you and I do agree on is that we've missed the mark with sports betting for the horse industry. It is a highly regulated form of gambling, and that's still something that's on the table for horse racing. I think that the conversation needs to be a little wider. We sit here and look at all the threats, which they all can be, but where are those opportunities for this new market we've been talking about for 20 years? Where are all the eyeballs at the moment? They're young, old, middle-aged, where are they? What are they watching? There's sports betting, there's prediction markets, it's the same markets. One thing that they both have in common is they don't have horse racing on them, for honest.
I think one of the things that we should consider as an industry is to try and set up a committee to discuss this internally and decide how we want to deal with it. I think it would be a disaster if one jurisdiction alone got into the prediction market and left the others out in the cold. So I think this should be an industry consideration, but we don't seem able to work that way.
It's a very fragmented industry. You're kind of inside and outside looking at the horse racing industry. Your toes in it with the horses, and yet from the business side, on the outside. What do you think as an industry we need to be doing from the prediction markets, sports betting, pari-mutuel, new fans?
Well, it's something I think about an awful lot. As we got in this business, my goddaughter is actually the head of our stable, and bringing her friends, who she just graduated from the University of Tennessee, into the world of horse racing has been a true pleasure. But at the same point, trying to onboard them and explain to them the process of betting and how to read a racing form is frankly a huge barrier to entry. And the companies that I've worked with, both in the traditional gaming space, the fantasy space, the Powerball, and now the prediction markets, have done just frankly a much better job of creating internalizable data, making that simple to ingest and then simple to execute and monetize on, and also by designing interfaces that are just very easy to use. I think a lot of lessons can be learned from that, but it seems as if traditional gaming companies in the horse racing sector have just been unwilling to do that for various reasons.
It's protecting what is theirs, it's declining.
I think it's frankly they've been able to operate successfully for so long in their regulated environment and have a big challenge. And frankly, there are just much better products out there. They either need to figure out how to internalize that technology and that skill set on their own behalf. If I believe if they don't, they're going to get no much cheaper.
Dave, Horses representative, what steps are you taking right now?
I think that the easy step for the horsemen's representatives is to make sure in your export approvals that you have a statement that says specifically you don't approve any of the prediction markets unless they're specifically stated to you by your track partner and you have an agreement on revenue sharing. That protects you from a racetrack cutting a deal that you have no knowledge of. Not that that's happening at this stage, but it sounds like at least one of them did go to Dennis, so I'm guessing.
It's gonna be outside your state horses, and you're putting it in your contract.
No, in your export approval, so it's under your interstate horse racing act. You can put anything you want in there, and I would definitely spell that out, that prediction markets are not governed, and they have to be specific. Every site has to be specifically listed, and you have to have a deal. So that's an easy. Everything else is a tough one. Much tougher. I don't pretend to be an expert in this space, and it changes every day. The lawsuits come fast and furious every day. I tend to agree with Dennis that it would be better if we had an industry-wide solution.
World peace.
Yeah, that's probably not going to happen. So realistically, you probably need to get with your track partners, have a discussion on it, and figure out A, if you want to participate in the market, and B, if you're participating, what the rate is. I think where Dennis is not going to get his way is they're not going to pay the current post fee. It's not even in that ballpark.
Sports, if you're a sports book or a prediction market, the data, they're comparing it to one another, and just because our sport is more expensive to put on, they don't care. It's about, is there an interest for it? What is it worth out of the market? Is what this is, and we have to really think about that.
It won't be, not only will it not be close, it won't be in the ballpark, and you have to decide how much volume you're going to get. And so I think that's a tough thing to do at the stage with the market still growing and being young, and how much of that handle is going to take away from your parimutuel handle, and that's also a tough thing to predict.
It's going down rapidly right now, and I think the thing is, one of the, when we speak about these type of decisions, whether it's sports wagering, who you sell to on a parimutuel scale, if we speak to on the prediction markets, if we're going to sit here and say, okay, the interstate horse racing applies to all of us, we won't get into the words for a moment. Well, I would say to the industry is, if you can give them the right to do it, you can take that right away. And I think that's one of the things I have seen over the years is we're so quick to say, no, we're not gonna do that. Instead of saying, hey, let's try to get a deal that's okay. Let's try it, but if it goes badly, stop it. I don't know why the industry doesn't follow that thought process.
I think you're right. I think that this is a little different animal because unlike exchange wagering where you did have the players in that space coming to the track, coming to the horseman, trying to reach a deal, I'm not sure you're going to have that in this space. And you're probably going to have to gain that through the court system, and how long that takes is anybody's guess.
I actually don't necessarily agree with that. I think that if a smart consortium as suggested, might be able to approach one of the players, again, with the idea of making a horse market friendly product, and defining the terms and scope of that. I actually think that you would probably get an answer that was more positive.
Do you think that there would need to be national breadth to that?
probably would be best, but I don't think you would need it. My guess is somebody will do that.
We'll see in those cities.
Absolutely.
A couple states. It's just not gonna move anywhere if they don't. I think that's what's gonna be done. Right, this has been a lively conversation. I think we're going to end on something that is, we've answered this question, but, our prediction markets, a threat or an opportunity to horse racing. Jason?
There's been a lot of good back and forth, and Dennis and Holt and David Gary just providing good feedback. The one thing that I'll say is, right now, I've never seen an advertising spend by a company for how much Kalshi and Polymarket and Robinhood is in the marketplace. The amount of ads they're running on TV, social media, I can't recall seeing more prevalent, industry. So if there was a path forward for horse racing to try to find a way to monetize that benefits them and get that exposure out there, because the younger generation wants that accessibility, and if they could find a way to navigate a prediction market partnership with HBPA in some way, or the tracks, I think you would try to craft the terms that's beneficial for you, obviously. But boy, just the exposure that we're getting right now is insane.
Yeah,
Absolutely could be.
Dennis?
I think it's both a threat and an opportunity. I think right now I lean towards the threat and I'm opposed to it. But there is a way to make it an opportunity. And when they sat down with me, and I think their ultimate goal is to deal a lot in crypto also, which I don't know that we're all ready to deal with. But there are a couple of states right now that let you do a third-party conversion of crypto to US dollars. But there's a lot to be talked about, but right now I think it's a big threat to our industry. And if we don't get it right, we're going to be on the short side of the argument.
Well, that's you, Mr. Wilson. I'm up with you. But I think prediction markets at the moment can be a threat right now. All legalized gambling states, if it is not gotten under control from a regulatory integrity. And this has nothing to do with horse racing. This is more about some of the contracts that they're taking out that have to do with war, that have to do with politics. So as a platform, I think it needs some shoring up, putting aside any of the legal sense of it. Just, we've seen gambling as a whole in the United States just explode with sports betting, and it's changed our culture in the sense of how we accept it. Horse racing's always been here. Lottery has been there. We have some casinos, and then sports wagering has just been a catalyst to acceptance of it. What's going on with prediction markets? I feel that it could tip us back the wrong way as an industry if it's not handled correctly. And then where does horse racing go? So I'm going to let you wrap up where you feel this is a threat, opportunity.
As I said, I've represented all sorts of different players who are in opposition potentially, or you potentially have the ability to partner. Over the last 40 years, I saw this exact same phenomenon happen with the Kansas sports explosion, which resulted in talking about advertising. Same thing happened in that world where you literally couldn't get away from ESPN fantasy, and now they've just been trying to realize the truth of it because it's all sports games to begin with. The same thing I think can happen here, and it certainly could be an existential threat, but I think it also, played correctly, could be the absolute solution to declining markets, declining engagement, especially in the younger generations. It's just how you're going to play it. And like Dennis said, being very smart about that outreach and having the right people who understand these markets and potential and the threat involved in that effort are going to be critical to defining whether that existential threat or existential benefit comes with it.
Thank you. We have a few minutes for questions, and I see Eric out here with the microphone.
Question for the panel. I've heard in the prediction markets there's a tremendous amount of computer wagering going on. And I was curious if you'd see that maybe differently, maybe a benefit where, computer wagering and horse racing, we've got a couple of elite groups that are really dominating everyone. But in a prediction market where you really only have to take one side of a board, a race, an outcome, it seems like that's potentially something that opens up to the entire world. And potential upside, not to mention like today and Thursday, I'm looking at my sports app right now. There's two SEC women's basketball games going on in this country, and then nothing for hours and hours. But obviously, we've got tons of horse races starting in a year, in an hour or so. So I was curious, your thoughts on how that would combine with also the computer wagering aspect of the ease of doing that in a prediction market format.
I will just tell you, there's some gigantic liquidity providers who are very professional, who would be absolutely thrilled to do that, and my belief is that, maybe I have a skin in this game, but the talent and sophistication of the effectively hedge fund-like, folks that are operating in that market, I would have no problem, setting them on the existing horse racing cause networks, and I think they would probably succeed.
Well, actually, that's too, Mark. The parimutuel pools, while they do have high volume players that you use computer models, they're limited in the amount of money that can bet by the liquidity in the pool. And, we all like to sort of talk about how much for the pool they are, but they like to be a bigger part of the pool, but the pool's not big enough for them to be able to be bigger. So this is where the prediction markets would give that liquidity for the potential to bet on.
I would ask, particularly. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Well, I think everyone agrees there's some protections for the horsemen and for the racetracks through the Interstate Horse Racing Act. The individual states and their ability to regulate and tax does not seem to be covered by the Interstate Horse Racing Act at all. That would be my question. Do you see any protections for the states themselves?
I was gonna say, it's the same as sports betting. And that level is federal law. What? Is it a federal platform? Is that you don't know? Oh, Dennis, do you want to add that?
The question,
The question is there any ability for taxing state taxes with prediction market platforms? And my response was the same sports betting. No, it's a federal platform.
I mean, I think the state's rights issues are from the Nevada decisions and some of the other jurisdictions. It seems like if you take the position that federal law does not preempt the state law, and the state can have a say in taxation and regulation and integrity, that's the better way to go. And I think ultimately that's not going to get decided until the Supreme Court weighs in on the case. So, I'm strongly in favor of states' rights. I think if you look back at the NCA versus Murphy case, which overturned PASPA, the Supreme Court believes in states' rights too. And, it's going to take years to get there, but I think at the end of the day, we get there and it's a states' rights issue, and they're not going to be able to offer sports betting or horse racing. Horse racing has a much better case because we have the Interstate Horse Racing Act, and even if preemption works to some extent, you can't have one federal law preempt another federal law.
Next question. There you go.
Yes, Bill Walmsley from Arkansas. I have them here up at Oakland. The horsemen consent to over 1,300 sites that the Oakland race signal is sent to. We make both Oakland and the horsemen have a principal motive in the approval or denial based on how it adversely might affect our own track attendance. And it seems to me I haven't heard addressed from y'all how much the moving in of prediction marketing and prediction, wagering, how much that might adversely affect on-track attendance for horse racing?
That's a good question. I would just say that when the existing sports leagues have looked at the same issue and decided in the case of MLS and the NHL, and some others that I believe are going to be announced, the same issues. They look at their engagement after cutting data deals with the prediction markets as substantially increasing. And they look at that engagement driving potential fandom going forward, which would potentially increase live attendance as well as attendance on social media, attendance on streaming. I had an interesting chat with some folks with the NHL who believe, frankly, they weren't saying it publicly, but the best thing that's ever happened to them in the prediction markets, because they have folks in stadiums all around the country, in venues that do not have licensed sports betting, who are able to sit in their arenas and live trade the games on the prediction markets in ways that are much more accessible than the existing non-compliant sports books that may be offered offshore. And then in compliant markets, you literally have folks sitting in stadiums with two screens trading, arbitraging the prediction markets against the pricing on the existing sports bet markets. So, I'm a media guy, and I always say that any more engagement is always going to be good for you, as long as you're not going to capitate yourself on a monetization basis. I think that there are, if you have more folks who are more interested because they have a financial stake in your races, they're probably going to show up and attend and have a great time, especially if they're winning and they have some extra cash in their pocket.
I will add to that. I think with everything that I host as far as betting is concerned, the ultimate goal is to raise the popularity of horse racing. People are swimming in a very deep sea right now. And any way we can put horse racing on additional platforms in front of new eyeballs, I think it's better for the sport. Obviously, the economics have to be there, but I do think the popularization of the sport needs to go beyond our AEWs and beyond our racetrack walls.
Paul Jensen from New Mexico. I assume most fees are paid by the prediction market to sports leagues. Is that a correct assumption?
No, it doesn't always work that way. Even in sports wagering, there are a lot of different models in which they can be paid. It could be a percentage of GGR, it could be a data fee, it could be a flat fee. It could even be a host fee, like a percentage of turnover. That is actually, we see less of those deals today in general sports betting. We see more as a percentage of GGR than anything else. But anything's possible when you come to the negotiating table.
So there's no model that we can follow.
No, I sell a lot of sports content outside of horse racing, and we see most of the GGR deals. Because they're taking the risk. That's the difference.
Time for one more question. It's Lynn McNally.
When casinos were legalized in Nebraska, sports betting was actually accidentally legalized. That was not part of the original petition drive. And then there was a question at one point about where the bets would be placed. We fought for it to stay at the casinos because my board successfully negotiated a revenue share for every bet that was placed. The other advantage that I saw was that their demographics skewed significantly younger than the pari-mutuel customer. And so I thought that it would be an assistance to us to have younger people in our same footprint. And as a matter of fact, Jason offered, we do a free voucher during March Madness. So every person who comes to place a bet gets a voucher for a pari-mutuel wager to have crossover with their customer. I'm just wondering, poly markets and prediction markets skew the youngest of any wagering platform. Is there an advantage there for us when we probably arguably have the oldest demographic?
Yeah, when you answer the hand over the polls, I would say I disagree with you when limiting that into the facility. And I say that because that may work for a group of people, but I can sit on my couch today. I think that Anything I desire, they're without ever leaving. I think you're leaving money on the table by not allowing people the convenience of being somewhere else. Okay.
Yeah, I think, I completely second that. I'm a big believer in giving the user, the experience they want, whether that's, on facility, off facility, giving them the best data and the best interface, the easiest to use interface, so that they can engage however they want, in what fashion they want, depending on the day it is. But yes, relative to the age of the clientele, the prediction market, skews much younger than any other gaming entity that I'm aware of. And additionally, the liquidity provided by that age bracket is very substantial. You have a huge amount of the term crypto growth, people who made a ton of money in crypto, who have now translated over and are using that liquidity on the prediction markets. So a huge opportunity to grab folks who previously haven't been enthusiasts of sports or specifically horse racing here. Just one person. There's two, low end SEC women's basketball games today, but there's a ton of horse races, and those people want action. They want liquidity in play. They want to have multiple events going. They have a trading stream on their phone, and they can, access all of that stuff instantly through their mobile, no matter where they are, whether they're on a train, or at work or at home. I'm giving them the option to do that. If the deal is struck appropriately, in my opinion, could only potentially be a benefit relative, lots of issues, but engaging a very, very wealthy young demographic and exposing them to the wonders that are, horse racing products. If done appropriately and thoughtfully, could be huge benefit.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you. Certainly a great panel, lots of information. So I am pretty happy that the direction that was also seen, certainly not at the symposium, is that there are some opportunities here.